Thank you everybody for coming. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for the organizer for inviting me to help facilitate and moderate this panel tonight. My name is Glenn Schwaber. I'm a partner with Israel Cleantech Ventures. For those of you who aren't familiar with our fund, we are an early stage venture capital fund operating in Israel since 2007. We manage two funds totaling about $135 million. Of assets under management to date. First fund is a $75 million fund that was raised in 2007. And the second fund we're in the process of raising. We've closed on about 60, and we started investing out of the second fund. Our target of the second fund is $100 million. We've invested in 13 companies so far in Israel, with one exception outside of Israel, in a range of clean tech sectors. So I gather the topic of tonight's discussion is investing in Israel Cleantech, Israeli Cleantech, and what we're going to try to do. I'll have the panelists introduce themselves right now briefly, and then I'll set the stage with a kind of a background presentation for about 10 minutes, and then each of us have prepared remarks on topics of particular expertise. Saul and Asaf and Rick each come from different domains and different parts of the ecosystem, both with entrepreneurial backgrounds, with investing backgrounds, with specific domain expertise in water, for example. And hopefully after our remarks, we'll open it up for discussion and questions, and we can have kind of an interesting evening together. So with that, I'll ask you to each to introduce yourselves and kick it off.
Go ahead, Saul.
So Glenn, it's like a 10 minutes now? 10-minute presentation?
Who you are,
Okay.
why you're here,
Okay.
and then kick it back to you.
Okay, it's good to be here. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Saul Reichman. I work at the Challenge Fund. It's an Israeli-based venture capital. We've been in existence for the last 15 years. Besides doing venture capital, during the last 3 years, we began screening and scouting for the CocaCola company. Not only in Israel today, we're also screening and scouting in Central and Eastern Europe. And Glenn and Sarah invited me over. I'll be speaking about our educating process with regards to working with a multinational corporation like the CocaCola company. And I'll leave it at here.
Thank you. My name is Asaf Barnea. I'm running Keynote Ventures. We are focusing on water technologies. We are considered to be currently the largest seed investor up to $1 million in water technologies worldwide in terms of number of portfolio companies. I've been running Keynote for the last 4.5 years. Prior to that, I've established and also the business development activity for the national water company in Israel, named Mekrot, which handles about 80% of the water in Israel. And actually started in the high-tech industry. I was one of the very first to move from the high-tech into clean-tech. Started in Converse, and then did the transition back in 2004, which I think has a little bit to do with the human side, the psychological barriers of stepping from the high-tech into clean-tech and investing and looking for people, the human resource kind of nature and point of view should be probably also discussed once investing in Israel.
Hi, my name is Rick Seidelman. I'm from Washington, D.C. area. The Seidelman Group was formed 25 years ago, and we are a merchant and investment banking firm. We had been investing since that time primarily in the U.S., and then in 2003 we made our first investment in an Israeli company, and everything that could go wrong did, but thought there was still something here to invest in, so that we then invested in an incubator, the Misgav, and to look for follow-on investments that came out of the incubator. And then we also invested in Glenn's Israel Cleantech. And so our goal is to partner with Israeli partners and invest in companies, both in clean tech, biomedical, medical device, and technology, and look for smart, good partners here to help us out with that.
Thank you. All right, I will hopefully get this projected here. Okay. So I think it's important before we get the rest of the panel underway is just to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of what are we talking about when we say clean tech. Right? Clean tech has become kind of has different meanings to different people. It's become kind of this umbrella theme, and we get many questions from investors and from partners as to what exactly we do and what's unique about Israel and where does Israel's role in the clean tech world. The other thing I'm going to spend a few minutes on is kind of the origins, why Israel is an interesting place to invest in clean tech companies, what makes this part of the world unique, and the ecosystem that's been created unique. I'll spend a little bit of time on the deal flow that we're seeing, and then I'll have each of the panelists spend time going deeper into each of the subjects. So we're all in this room because there's been some recognition that clean tech is a enormous field offering great potential for investors and for humanity alike. And one way of thinking about this is looking at the enterprise value of the largest companies in the world. So what we've done here is we've taken the enterprise value of the largest 1,000 companies. This is the Fortune Global 1,000 list, and we've broken it down by sector. And what we see here is that about 45% of the world's wealth by enterprise value is in areas that are directly impacted by natural resources. So when resources get constrained, these are industries that are going to suffer and need to innovate their way out of that. You look at the energy sector, industrials, materials, utilities. I think it's interesting to point out that IT, information technology, and we talk about venture capital and high tech. That's less than 10% of the world's wealth, according to enterprise value. The other thing that's important for everybody to recognize is that clean tech isn't one thing. It's subsectors and it's sectors within subsectors, and we just take we take electricity, and you can break that down into generation, efficiency, and storage, and then within generation you just take solar PV as one subsector, and within that you can break it down into thin film and CPV, concentrated photovoltaics, and inverter technologies and coatings and combinations thereof. And each of these technology areas may or may not represent good investment areas at different times. And so I guess the big message coming out of this slide is that there are different times for making investment, different types of investment. Not any of these. Every sector here is going to be relevant for venture capital. Some are more project finance oriented. Some are bank lending, etc. And some of them are just frankly not interesting right now because the markets aren't right. They're not regulated, or regulation is changing and changing the attractiveness of some of them. This is the non-electricity view. You have transportation, emissions, agricultural, water, waste and recycling. Water here is just one of many clean tech sectors. We'll hear from Asaf shortly about his experience going deep within water and understanding the different subsectors there and where there are opportunities for investment at an early stage at a seed level and where there may not be. So now going back to Israel. So why is Israel interesting? Well, as many of you know, this is a country that has not been granted many natural resources until the recent offshore natural gas find. There have been no domestic source of fossil fuel. Transportation fuel has been imported. We're a coal-based energy economy. What we have been blessed with is an abundance of sunlight and an abundance of brain power, more engineers per capita than any other country in the world. And the founding fathers of this country, David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister, recognized this back in the 50s and said as a nation we need to be focusing on these areas. And as a result of which there's a lot of excellence within the university and academic establishments that have been built up. There are several multinational companies that have come out of Israel, leaders such as Ormat in geothermal energy or IDE in desalination, Netafim in drip irrigation. And so that's kind of the roots of the clean tech innovation cycle in this country. That being said, until 2005, there really wasn't venture money going after this. The 8% that represented IT, and then the other 12% that represented by medical device technologies, that was capturing the attention of the VCs until 2005, 2006. And at that point, there were three funds that got started all around the same time. My own fund, Israel Cleantech Ventures, Terra Ventures, and Aqua Agro, three dedicated clean tech funds, as well as some privatized government incubators, Keen wrote among them, and some family offices and private individuals got involved as well. Since then, there's been a rebirth of activity in early stage innovation in clean tech. So for 40 years, there really wasn't much between those three large companies I mentioned and the university research. And all of a sudden, going from a database of 120 or so companies in 2005, we now have a database of over 1,000 companies. So about 130, 140 new projects are trying to get started every year in this country, which is frankly quite amazing, because 5-6 years ago it just wasn't happening. What this slide tries to demonstrate is kind of where Israel has cluster areas of expertise that have grown out of the high-tech history here, whether it's in the chemicals or biotech, power electronics, semiconductors, energy storage. These are areas that have been funded by VCs in the past, and we see a lot of entrepreneurs coming out of these areas tapping into clean tech end markets. So to just take one example in power electronics, for example, there you have companies like Power Design, which was a leader in power over Ethernet. The founder there, a gentleman by the name of Ilan Atias, came out of one of the intelligence units in the Army, a power electronics unit, was co-founded Power Design. That company went for a public offering on NASDAQ, was publicly listed, then got sold. He's now, as a second-time entrepreneur, focusing on clean tech. And what he's teamed up with a Russian immigrant, a former scientist from the Soviet Union who has expertise in motors, industrial motors, and the two of them are working on a drive for energy efficiency in industrial motors. Away, okay. What? Good? Okay. Great. So,
he didn't want you falling asleep.
Right. So InnoState, which is Elon's second company, is going after a market of a $9 billion market of industrial motors. It's an installed base, and they're trying to save 30 to 50% of the energy required to run these motors. And this is typical of the types of entrepreneurs we're seeing, meaning second or third time startup entrepreneurs who have come out of other fields, have expertise, and are looking at the trends in the end markets and figuring out where they can play into those. The government and academia is fully mobilized at this point. I'll ask Asaf to talk about kind of the Incubator Program and Keen wrote specifically. The Office of the Chief Scientist is funding companies and R&D budgets within companies, specifically around clean tech. Bird Foundation, the binational U.S.-Israel R&D group, has a bird energy project, which is funding projects jointly between the U.S. and Israel. I think what's interesting here also in terms of the ecosystem is that both the utilities, both the water utility and the electrical utility, have programs to help facilitate startup innovation. So in Mikhail Roth's case, the WATEC program helps young companies pilot their solutions within the water utility. And in Israel Electric Corporation's case, they actually invest into startups up to $500,000 at the seed stage. In many cases, they've come in even before the VCs have joined, and which is fairly forward-looking for a state-run monopolistic utility to be investing actual cash into startup companies that have yet to prove any commercial product or viability, and yet the IEC is doing that much to their credit. There's been a lot of international interest in what's going on in Israel over the last 5 years. These are, at the bottom, you can just see recent delegations. These are companies like Costco, which is a large Korean steel conglomerate, and Tata from India, and Gamesa, a large Spanish wind company. These are folks that are coming to Israel seeking innovation here. At the top right, you see kind of representatives from global industry. GE specifically is very active here. BP has been active. These are entities that have either invested here, have acquired companies here, have people on the ground here, or on their way to doing so. In terms of the deal flow we're seeing, I mentioned we've reviewed over 1,000 opportunities thus far since we got underway, 2 to 5 new deals a week, and about 40-43% in energy, another 20-25% in water and agri-tech, and in general green tech. Again, this is a wave of activity that has really changed over the past several years. So when there was no capital, and when the best entrepreneurs were going after telecommunications and internet and enterprise software, there really wasn't much of a clean tech ecosystem here. That has changed, and many more people are paying attention to this sector. This is just a sample of our own portfolio. Again, going back to the first slide about what is clean tech, it's different sectors and subsectors. We've tried to develop a portfolio that taps into many of these subsectors and to provide diversity in that way. And at this point, I'll hand it over to the panelists. First, Asaf will talk about the Incubator Program and Israel's talent in water innovation and water solutions. Shauli will talk about his experience as working with CocaCola as a case study as a multinational company that's looking at Israel as a place to tap into innovation. And then finally, Rick will give us the international perspective of an investor who's been doing this here for many years and why clean tech is interesting to him. Thank you.
Incubators in Israel, actually, probably the most important factor that should be distinguished or should be stated in terms of incubators is the fact that the 24, 22 actually that we have in Israel, there have been some which are so actually the incubator program has started in Israel about 20 years ago. Back in 1991, the main idea back at the time was to support the wave of Russians who came over from Russia, engineers, professors, researchers that were looking to maintain their job somehow and their position back in Russia. But unfortunately, there were not too many positions in Israel to be able to absorb those people and their expertise. So back in 1991, the government has decided to build those incubators, and if I need to indicate like a major step that happened in 2002, where a privatization process has started. That is to say that private equity or family offices or VCs started to buy incubators, and to really, some of them started to focus on various fields, and some are very much open even these days to embrace and to invest in various technologies and not specifically to be focused on any specific field. Now, I've mentioned the word invest, and this is the main statement that I would like to share with you guys. For those of you who are not from Israel, whenever you are, let's say, in the US or in Europe, in most cases, incubators will be service providers. That is to say, startup companies will come in, they pay the rent for the incubator may help them to do some, support some financial services, business plans, whatever. The incubator may get some fees, but that's that. In Israel, it's a unique platform, actually a bridge of investment of up to $1 million, either 2 or 3 years of operation, may eventually be able to invest in those companies up close to $1 million. And us, as the incubator owners, management team, whatever we are in that position, we become shareholders and board members in those companies. So very unique model as opposed to whatever is happening in Europe and in the US, whereby incubators do not invest. That, by the way, is causing a lot of issues. Could be conflict of interest between, let's say I'm sitting on a board with one of my companies, and sometimes I would like to shut the company down, And I may be accused by the entrepreneurs that as a director or as a chairman of this company, I'm not allowed to close a company down, while being a CEO of the incubator, I need to, because maybe they're not complying with whatever the regulations are and all of that. But this is really something that I don't want to step into that. But just to illustrate a bit or to distinguish the model, the Israeli model, as opposed to incubators in Europe and in the States, and I assume also in the East, which are now we start to see more and more. So that probably is I would define it as the very important topic to acknowledge and to realize that the fact that we are the very first stage, a seed investor up to $1 million in each of those companies that we invested in. As I've mentioned, there are some incubators that have put on their flags medical device and pharma and biotech, whatever it may be. Some have stated Cleantech in general. We have focused on water technologies, and this is water-related technologies. For those of you who may have visited our website, the slogan that I came up with 4.5 years ago was a rainbow of water technologies, a spectrum of water innovation. And actually, I will talk about water innovation in a second, but just maybe the last word about that beautiful program. We are currently trying to, in incubators in Israel as a whole, we're trying to move to where actually your incubator has moved into. The main idea of being able to invest in your company, or in your portfolio companies, and eventually not be able to do the full upfront of investment once post-incubation period, after 2 or 3 years within that, and therefore be diluted by these guys, does not make sense to us as incubators. This is why it is crucial and most very important is actually to try to move forward and to raise $10 million, let's say, parallel to the incubator, and really be able to invest or co-invest with the VCs or with strategic investors. Otherwise, we have took an idea, let it be from the Weizmann Institution, let it be from the technical institution, built a team, built a nice, decent company, maybe 4 or 5 people, have gone through the stages of the ups and downs and the feasibility and the proof of concept, whatever it may be, and eventually just handed on to someone who came in and took the company, diluted us, and not to say they're not taking any chances. Definitely they are taking some chances and risks and challenges. Could it be on the technological side or marketing? Definitely. But all I'm saying is that this is one of the most important issues currently on incubators' plates, is how to be able to co-invest with those who come in and invest in portfolio companies. Probably the third point that I would like to emphasize is really the uniqueness of that mechanism allows us, and this is at least my vision, something that I've worked very closely, and I'm trying to convince the chief scientist and the minister himself even, is the fact that we always speak in Israel about IP, about being or having IP. Living Israel under the R&D law in Israel, we're not allowed to. There are some sanctions or penalty to be paid when our mergers and acquisition, liquidation events, exits. Israel is definitely, this is what the main word that should be put on the table. One of the visions that I have, at least, is definitely to bring, and due to that uniqueness that I've mentioned at the beginning, to be able to bring IP from overseas to Israel. And I will illustrate that with two patents or IP that I currently have on our plate, and this is part of what I'm trying to push. We have signed in Keynote Ventures a partnership agreement with GE Water, which is a $2.5 billion operation within GE Power. One of the things that I've offered Heiner Markov, the CEO of GE Water, I told him, listen, Heiner, probably you guys in GE, you have dozens of patents which will be sitting on the shelf for the next 15 years, untouched. Give it to us. We are here to take the risk. We can build a team. We are very good in combining or taking people from the high-tech industry, from the semiconductor industry, whatever, build a small team of 3, 4, 5 people, invest up to $1 million, and simply give it a chance. In most cases, those platform incubators in the U.S. will not be able to provide something like that, and no investor, definitely not a private investor, will step into such an early stage, an IP, a patent in that early stage. So let's say GE, and they did give us actually one patent, which is energy-related or energy recovery within desalination plants. So this is one example. Another example is actually, I gave a presentation in the Boston area, and we got a patent from the Harvard University, which is water treatment related. And this is definitely, again, actually in Israel, we've been talking about exits and having IP being exported out of Israel, which actually one of the things that I've talked to the chief scientists and convinced them to adopt that model more and more is actually to bring IP to incubators in Israel. Now, there are some difficulties because this is kind of a corporate funding, whatever, GE, whatever, so not necessarily an Israeli company and all of that. There are some difficulties related to that because eventually the Israeli government should invest in local companies. But at least in my vision, I think that's the uniqueness which could be utilized to really embrace the incubator program and the fact that we are investing in Israel up to $1 million. And otherwise, such few patents, let it be within GE, will be sitting on the shelf untouched for the next 12, 15 years because not everything is going to the R&D. 5 minutes about water innovation. I'm always, if I don't have something like that, I'm asking for, whenever I'm giving a presentation, of those of you who have seen me before, so I'm always giving this anecdote, so forgive me for those of you who have seen that. Many of us have gone into restaurants and got some water spilled over the shirt. And I'm sure it happened to you guys, whether on the, just like a few days ago, celebrating the New Year or whatever it was. So we usually go and say, leave that, this is just water, it's not wine, whatever, no harm done. But actually, if you look into that, and it looks simple, it looks transparent, but it's not. It's not that simple. It's not that simple as we tend to think about it. This is, if you look into that, it is actually a world of physics and chemistry and biology and software and energy. Really, there's so much into that. And those complexities actually
are... CocaCola.
CocaCola. Yeah. CocaCola is probably, 90% water, so...
more than 90% water.
But the equation is... in any event, this is, though it looks simple and transparent and whatever I was trying to convey, it is definitely not. And this is actually the basis for having innovation into that. Let it be on, let's say, on leak detection. So it will embrace or incorporate whatever has to do with acoustic technologies and software. Let it be detection of microorganisms in water. So it will embrace technologies which are related to biology, definitely, chemistry, optics, whatever it will be. Let it be on the software side. Those of you who have heard about Takadu, again, a leak detection company, but let it be a wastewater treatment and waste. I mean, so much is related to water, and this is what is nice about it. Water was neglected, was not sexy for so many years. I call it a compelling event back in 2004 when GE and Siemens have stepped into the water industry and have bought companies for over $1 billion. That kind of awakened the market. The Sleeping Beauty has awakened. Now, some of you may say, this is not such a beauty, wastewater, Sleeping Beauty, who knows? I mean, the connotation may not be as great. But nevertheless, those guys, VCs, private equity, angel investors, did not even consider water investment prior to 2004. At 2004, when GE and Siemens have stepped into that, they've kind of awakened the market. And Suez and Veolia were there, the French giants. But nevertheless, this is actually started to be very interesting because the investors have stated, there's going to be probably more and more mergers and acquisition following those giants or corporates stepping into that. And ever since 2004, we've been seeing LG, the Korean TV manufacturer, that have just announced back in September 2010. TV and some chemical operation probably, that have stepped into that. IBM have announced to step into the water industry about 3-4 years ago. BASF, that's on one of Glenn's slides, one of probably the largest chemical manufacturer worldwide, the German-based, bought a membrane company called Inge about a year ago and have announced a strategic move towards the water industry. So I'm not going to talk about scarcity of water. I'm not going to talk about the need, obviously, because there are places worldwide, let's say hubs of innovation, as I call them. Could it be Israel? Definitely. Netherlands and Canada, for instance, they do not suffer from any scarcity of water. Nevertheless, and maybe because of that, the abundance or maybe flooding and all of those issues which are related to pressure management and water control, they've announced those countries to step into the water industry and to support it on a government kind of level priority, which the Israeli government has decided to do so back in 2006. And I will finish up maybe with two examples of portfolio companies that we have invested in, just to give you a taste of what we are looking at. The focus on water innovation in Kinnerot Ventures started in 2006. A Canadian group bought Kinnerot and kind of franchised that and privatized that. And basically, about 2 years ago, there was a transaction whereby a local VC, the Aqua Agro Group, has replaced the Canadian investment team. But basically, that water focus has started just in 2006, 2007. So most of the portfolio companies that we have are very early stage, but some of them were successful in getting additional round of financing post the incubation period. One example is a company which is called TA Counts. TA Counts came to us, three guys with a patent, an idea of a kind of a rapid detection of microorganisms in water. So biological contamination, not chemical contamination, but rather a biological contamination. And the best example would be companies that you have heard about, bottle companies, water companies such as Mayed and Eviot and whatever, that have been suffering from recalls, all of those recalls. The fact that those are actually repeating incidents is the fact that whatever is the test today, the gold standard test worldwide for decades and decades, called CFU, colony forming units. Simply you take as we were kids in high schools, you take the Petri dish, you send it to the laboratory, culture the germs, and after 2 or 3 days you get back the results. While within these 2 or 3 days, most of those companies, they're shifting up their products to the market, their inventory. Let it be bottled water companies or let it be something else. At the same time, they may be, after 2 or 3 days, getting back the results from the laboratory and saying, you know what, in that shipment 2 days ago, E. coli, coliforms, and all of a sudden you have the recalls of Nestle, Slimfast, I don't know about CocaCola, but this is definitely a global phenomenon. TA Count is taking a phenomenon, a biological phenomenon basically, and can look into that specific kind of equivalent of that gold standard test, not in 2 or 3 days, or 2 or 3 days, but rather in 5 minutes. So imagine the value of such company that can really do that almost online and provide to those food and beverages companies as well as water utilities almost an online capability of looking into those biological contamination. We have brought in Hutchison Water. They have invested $2.5 million in that company, and they're now about 9 people. They've grown. They get a lot of interest from global companies looking to become distributors of such technology, and this is definitely a good company that we are looking to be a solid company. I'm not sure about the exit and multiples, whatever the numbers are, yet to be seen. The last example that I would like to give it to you, to share with you, is a company called Diffuser. Diffuser is a wastewater or energy reduction in wastewater treatment plants. Now, whenever I'm saying that, I'm a bit shocked because I didn't know that 1% of the total energy consumption on our planet is designated to wastewater treatment plants. This is amazing. I don't want to say, could be a shitty example to say how much energy is wasted, but there hasn't been innovation in wastewater treatment plants for decades and decades. Who would have thought high-tech guys, moving or bringing in the innovation, startup companies into wastewater? We have not seen those, and this is exactly the opportunity to bring innovation to those old-fashioned processes and old-fashioned ways of running those wastewater, which were suffering or which are not efficient, which are definitely could be, if you bring an integrated or retrofit technology into those operation, you could save a lot of money. And actually, Diffuser can do that and save almost 50% of the aeration costs within that. So the last business model, which is always important, is not just to look for innovation on the technological end, but rather on the business side. So kind of revenue share, energy sharing, ESCO model to split the savings within that. So a startup company can come with a project financing a fund or a group and basically offer to the municipalities, you know what, you guys don't need to pay for that technology, but we shall share with you for the next 10, 15 years the saving that technology may potentially bring to your current operation. So with that, I hope that was not too much, but just to give you slightly of what we do.
So I'm just gonna, where I first told you about our partnership with CocaCola has been going on for the last 3 years. It's been very interesting. It's been a learning process and still is. Coke began by saying that we used to work for them, now we're working with them. They first decided to come to Israel mainly due to water innovation. Of course, Coke's main ingredient and main source of all its beverages is water. So this was their main interest. And when they came to Israel, they really wanted somebody here on the ground to screen and scout for green-based technologies. Because at the end of the day, as a multinational corporation, they're looking to better understand their water use ratio, their energy use ratio, their total waste ratio. But very soon, and like I started saying, this was a learning process for both parties. Because they're working as a franchisee business model, and the water sources differentiate between bottler and bottler, it was very hard to implement one water-based technology for most of the bottlers. This was a learning process. During the first year, we screened many technologies, and it was very sporadic. I mean, if we saw things relating to energy, relating to water, and we handed it forward to the Coca-Cola company, working with the external technology acquisition department within Coke. But you must understand that at that stage, we, and together also Coke, understood that it's a difficult process if you don't implement open innovation within the system. And you can read books like Open Innovation by Henry Chesborough, but this wasn't implemented well enough within the system. When I talk about the system, I'm referring to the corporate. And after 1 year of doing this, they came back to us. We brainstormed together and set forth on doing something that is more methodology-based, meaning they created not only an external technology acquisition department that is more staffed, but also subject matter experts. These are people that work within the system that know what the company is doing, and each technology that is screened or being referred has somebody within the company that can actually study the specific technology. Today, for example, we're working in direct contact with Coke's CTO. He's the number 3 person within the corporate. So this is something that has evolved. It wasn't like this 2 years ago. And we shifted from looking into green technologies, which was too broad and not focused, and looking more into sustainability. Today what we're doing is Coke, as a big company, has the privilege to have a strategy that looks towards 2020. So we study with the External Technology Acquisition Department the 2020 vision. After doing this, we, together with them, we approve targets. Today we're working, for example, on 10 targets. And I'll talk a little bit later about what we're looking at. After we approve the targets, we begin screening and scouting, and this is a process, understanding better the technology, also looking into the business and how it's relevant to Coke, to the system. We're looking at strategically focused investments. These are not financial. We're the only foreign body outside of Coke that's doing external technology acquisition. And then once we begin the screening and scouting process, if we come across relevant and interesting technologies, we start studying them. We speak with subject matter experts, and if we think that this may be interesting, then we decide whether to incubate this technology, whether to develop it, whether to pilot it. And most of the time, these are projects that take more than 1 or 2 years. If this does interest at the end of the process the company, then we'll look into scaling this. And of course, distributing it through the whole bottling system. So today, as I said, we're looking at 10 targets. These are looking into, for example, packaging technologies. We're looking at green chemistry, lots of materials. We're looking into functional ingredients. We're doing a lot of sustainable agriculture, and Israel has a lot to offer in this sector. We're looking, for example, at breeding technologies, enhancing of fruit properties. These are our current targets. We will get back to water, but this needs to be something that is more holistic. And so we continuously approve more and more targets. And of course, this is the advisory board that at the end of the day does this. Today in Israel, we work with all of the Israeli academia and also research institutes. We have signed master institutional research agreements with the Volcani Center, for example. We have signed a $5 million research agreement. We've been doing this also with the Hebrew University, for example, the Technion. We also worked with the Office of Chief Scientist. In a few more weeks, you will see distributed throughout the Israeli daily newspaper a call for proposal that CocaCola is working in collaboration with the Office of Chief Scientist. We do screen and scout what's going on with regards to incubators. We also work with companies, also startups. So this is the process. I must say that this is a long process. Working with a multinational company like Coke is something that takes time, and Israeli entrepreneurs don't always have the patience. And this is, for example, where you see some bottlenecks when Israeli startups want to, for example, when they come to Coke, for example, to pilot their technologies. This sometimes takes too much time, according to Israeli entrepreneurs. During 2011, that was our first year, we received a mandate to screen and scout not only in Israel but also in Central and Eastern Europe. This was very fascinating for us, for me individually, traveling to all these exotic countries. I must say that for people coming from Georgia, from Atlanta, they still perceive the ex-USSR as something that is, the Cold War, something very exotic, something that still may contain a lot of technology. It's only when you leave Israel do you really appreciate and understand that Israel is a startup nation, and I feel it on a daily basis, because it's been a difficult process to screen and scout technologies from these specific countries, and I can talk a lot about the obstacles. And so with regards to at least the Coca-Cola company, we're at a stage where we have enough deal flow, meaning the company has, because it's a multinational company, and the cycles are very I would say unconventional at times. We find that it's the company that actually tells us, let's work more slowly, because we have enough projects now that we're looking at. So hopefully what we envision is to hopefully find other places such as Israel and copy this system. This is eventually what Coke would like to do. Not necessarily in Central and Eastern Europe, but in other countries around the world. So this is just a little bit about the learning process that Challenge Fund has experienced during the last 3 years, and it's very, very interesting, especially working with a company like Coke, and people conceive, or people think that the beverage industry is a conservative industry. At times it is, but it's a 125-year business that, they know what they're doing, they know how to market, and when it comes to innovation, this is something that is new to them. So it's been a learning experience. Thank you.
Hi, Glenn has asked me to speak about what is attractive to invest in Israel. From a Cleantech perspective, Israel is a living laboratory. As Glenn said, with the sun, with water conservation, Ben-Gurion said it 55 years ago, it's necessary. And so because it's necessary, the Israelis take the initiative to go ahead and develop these things because they have to. They don't have the oil, they don't have the resources. and therefore there's a constant need to create ideas and change. From an outside perspective, for investors, one of the things that we look to anytime you invest in a foreign country is the rules are different, customs are different, the way people do business is different, the way deals are structured may be different. And so one of the things that we look for is to partner with incubators and next round investors so that we can coattail on their knowledge, on their experience, and not make mistakes that we might make because we're outside the country. I mentioned before that our first investment was in 2003, and everything that could have gone wrong did. And it's like, wait a minute, I've been doing this investing for 15 years before then, 18 years before that. I know how to do this. The answer is no. Each country and each situation is different. And so what we did is we tried to get educated. We invested in the MISCOB incubator to learn and watch some of these young companies to see which ones excelled, to see which ones proved themselves, had good management, had good ideas. There's so many things that it takes to make a business successful. You can have the best idea with the wrong people. You could have the best idea with the best people, but nobody wants to buy it. There's not a market for it. And so when you look at all the challenges that you face when you start a business and you run it, there's so many things that everything has to go right in order for it to work that you need somebody on the ground, a partner here to watch this much more frequently than you can from abroad. One of the other things that, so our goal in investing in the MISCOB was to watch these companies and maybe find one or two a year that we could then go from the seed round or the incubator round, and that we could provide the first round of what's called Series A capital. We would be the first outside investor after the seed round. And it would be wonderful. I love Asaf's idea. If the incubators could get additional capital, it's not our goal to reduce the amount that the founders own or that the incubators own. It's to make a return on investment. And so we would even feel more comfortable if the incubators would co-invest, and because they would be putting their money where their mouth is, it would attract more capital, because once the incubators stop investing, two things happen. The owners get diluted because new money comes in and has to own a certain percentage of it. And then there'll be another round of capital, and then another round of capital. So the people who made this happen and did all the work, all the entrepreneurs that think that should own a larger chunk of the company, from their perspective, end up being smaller. Why? One, the incubator that did a lot of the work can't co-invest. And two is that generally the founders don't have any money or very little money to co-invest. And so it would be wonderful. I love that idea, and I don't know how you get that moving forward, but I think that would be something that's fundable. So we come in, and then our goal is to add value, strategic value, to the company from an operating business. You have an idea, it works, the technology works, and so what happens is there's a transition that happens at that point where you need strategic vision, you need to prove out your business model, and you need to add a different skill set from the engineer or the inventor that created the product or the service or the idea, and then launch that and help build the foundation of a company. So that's really where we come in. Other things that we see in Israel is because there's this incubator system, there, as Glenn mentioned, he's looked at 1,070 clean tech opportunities. I doubt you could go to any other country in the world, and there's been cumulatively nearly that many ideas. So because Israel is a hotbed of ideas, you get to see what's going on. If anybody shows me a clean tech opportunity, Glenn, what do you think of this? Because Glenn is seeing everything. He knows what the competition is. He knows what's going on. He knows what's out there. And it's really good to have a partner who can give the quick look to say, no, this is not something you want to get interested in, or, gee, this is something you can get interested in. So once again, if you're an investor, look for a partner that has this skill set and can be the eyes and ears. And I would say that that's primarily the reasons that we like investing in Israel, and hope that we can continue to do more in the future.
So I had a couple of questions prepared for the panelists, but I think at this point it would be frankly more interesting and to open it up and get some interaction with the rest of you. So if people have questions to all of us, to any one of us, feel free. Yeah.
I have a question.
Maybe you could just introduce yourself and say your name and your background.
My name is Jonathan Fromm. I'm an entrepreneur and got a physics background in mechanical engineering, deal with energy efficiency and solar energy projects. I have a question for Sol. Actually, it's nothing to do with what I'm doing. You talked about the screening and sieving of many companies, which have come through, with examples of things that have come through in Israel in the 3 years with CocaCola, because that's fully directly related to the industry.
Could you repeat the question to everybody, please? Yeah, what is it?
Jonathan
asked me if I could give specific examples of partnerships or collaboration that we did with Israeli entities. So I can start by saying, for example, if you look at the academia, we did sign 2 master institutional research agreements with the Hebrew University and the Vulcani Center. There we do research on breeding. Specifically, for example, we're looking on enhancing pulp within fruit. So, for example, in developed countries, fruit juices has become more popular than carbonated drinks. So, specifically in North America, for example, pulp, people like to drink juice with pulp. So if we could, for example, have a grapefruit or an orange that has more pulp, that would be better. Or, for example, if we could have a grapefruit that is less bitter. So we have 5 ongoing projects with the Vulcani Center. We're doing experiments, for example, with we don't make juice out of melons, but we are testing, for example, sweeteners that are produced within melons and seeing if we can, of course, make use of them. You've heard maybe of stevia, but there are other sweeteners that we're working on. With the Hebrew University, we're looking at projects, for example, that relate to encapsulation of materials. For example, when one drinks any beverage that has caffeine in it, you have a rush of caffeine, and then slowly it just disappears. And it would be great if there would be, like for pesticides, slow release of functional chemicals. It's rocket science, but this will come through one day.
This is killing yourself.
So we are working on encapsulation, for example, both with the Hebrew University and the Technion. Regarding startups, we have, I'd rather not mention big companies, but we have piloted a few companies in India, for example, and in Mexico. There are mainly, we looked at water monitoring and also looking at some desalination projects. Regarding companies, you have companies like Netafim that we have helped penetrate into the bottling system. Also, you have Amniat, for example, that's a filtration company. We have 2 other companies that we have collaboration with, but I won't mention their names, but one of them is regarding pesticides. And let's look at that.
Just a comment, going back to the Coca-Cola example, I think one of the things that we can see now, and everybody's saying that Cleantech is very conservative and capital intensive and all that, which indeed is so, to some extent. Nevertheless, we do see some kind of trends, seeing the corporates stepping in and building up some kind of mechanisms to embrace innovation. Not just that example with Coca-Cola, Veolia, the French giant who have established an accelerator for waste and water, Suez, another French giant who have built or established a corporate VC to invest in water and in waste. and we see some partnership being built between the large corporate and those how to dance with those gorillas. It's not easy, basically. This is definitely a major when we talk about innovation and the integration. Cleantech, in my definition, by the way, and this is at least one perspective, is depth. Is the convergence between the high-tech innovation, so to some extent, innovation into the infrastructure. It's not just the innovation startup. If this is not or this could not be integrated into the infrastructure, we have accomplished nothing. So basically, those mechanisms and platforms that we see more and more hopefully will help all of us to see the returns, to see some more and more case studies and successful case studies of acquisitions and mergers and even distribution agreements. I'm always saying I'm okay with having a $50 million company, hopefully that we were able to establish in Israel and who knows, may distribute some dividends later on and not necessarily provide an exit. This will be definitely part of our agenda, I would say, as in Israel. This is not just the exit, which are nice, definitely.
But I think that's very key to understand. Meaning, when you look at where there are opportunities to invest, whether it's clean tech or other sectors, what you want to see is very large companies, multinational companies, being interested, not for the sake of greenwash in this instance, but for the sake of fundamentally altering their bottom line, improving their bottom line. And so CocaCola is one great example that's been active in Israel. We have discussions ongoing now with Unilever, another enormous consumer goods conglomerate. Unilever touches 2 billion people every day with their products, right? So it's almost a third of the world. And they have set goals for themselves that are unfathomable in terms of the impact that they will have on the startup community, right? They're not going to get there without innovation, and that innovation is going to have to come from without. And there are 3 or 4 places in the world that can provide that to them. And so they have a very definite strategy of investing in funds, investing in companies, and then ultimately acquiring businesses. And that's where investors become happy, right? When you see active investments on the part of corporates, that means there's going to be M&A activity down the road. It means there's going to be IPOs of companies that get acquired after they're public, and that basically creates the opportunity to make outsized returns for the venture capital. And that's what we've been seeing happening in a lot of clean tech sectors over the course of the last decade, and that's only increasing. Yeah.
Another question for Rick. You say that you are interested in innovation done in Israel, but still you want a doorkeeper, a Israeli company, VC or somebody, that leads you. But the local thing, does it limit the views about the possibility? I mean, if some new idea is not typically good for Israel, but probably working elsewhere, don't you defeat yourself?
If I understand the question correctly, if the technology is developed in Israel but it's not for Israel, that's fine. I mean, that's actually what we're all looking for, because the technologies, Israel's not that big of a market, and so that's what's also beautiful about the Israel innovation is it's applicable generally worldwide. And so you can take an idea that may or may not work in Israel. Generally, it does, but it doesn't have to, and it shouldn't, because if the entire market was potentially just Israel, the market would, generally speaking, not be that large. So hopefully whatever's being developed is for a worldwide market, so that the opportunity is there for everybody. So it doesn't need to be in Israel. Should be. I mean, it doesn't matter, but it should be worldwide.
Then, what about the idea of the local doorkeeper that you just mentioned? The incubator or somebody in Israel that evaluates it and joins it and finances it. It doesn't work this way.
Oh, yeah. The doorkeeper is here to make sure that management is doing what it's supposed to that they're following the business plan, that they are reporting regularly. It's just more difficult being 7 hours away. And when I work here, we come to Israel frequently. When I work, what happens is I get up at 6 in the morning, and from 6 to 8, I'm answering emails from the U.S. from yesterday. Then I meet with Israeli companies and do work here, and then I go back to the office. You all know this because you're living here. Then at 3 or 4 o'clock, you start having conversations and direct emails with people because it's now 9 o'clock in the morning East Coast time. Much less doing business in California, which is 10 hours away, or in China, which is whatever hours away. So you can only do so much in a day. And then Thursday, right? Thursday, you've got Israel, you kind of stop at, let's say, 6, 7, 8 o'clock Thursday, and then Shabbat starts. You can't even talk to somebody because it's 4 o'clock here. Shabbat's coming in. You can't even contact Friday. Then Saturday's Shabbat, and then the U.S., the weekend is Saturday and Sunday, right? So you don't really work in the U.S. on Sunday. Then Monday comes, and you can't really talk to somebody until 4 o'clock Israel time. So you lose half of Thursday, all of Friday, this is one of the challenges that I point out to everybody. It's not easy working from 7 hours away. And so one of the reasons is if you have somebody here local, they're on the same time frame and they can take care of business rather than here and losing literally three days a week. So that's the doorkeeper idea.
That was not my question. I probably didn't
I'm sorry.
explain myself well. Suppose
Maybe we can talk about that afterwards, because I'm really...
Yeah, let's try to get some other people.
So I'm happy to talk to you afterwards. So I had a question
Yeah.
right here.
I'm Arin Yashir. I'm the professional director of the School of the Environment that is hosting this panel. To the panel, to all of you, and maybe to Shaul especially, the issue, you said you are supporting research in academic institutions. You know, one of the problems within Israeli academic institutions is the issue of the IP. How did you solve, in this particular example, supporting a master research, the whole issue of the IP?
At times it's a shared IP, and if we think that this is something that is interesting enough for a program, this would be something that Coke will want something just for itself, then this is negotiable. But most of the time this is a joint IP.
So the university share the IP with you?
Yes. And we're looking at research that is ongoing. We have researchers that are looking at 5-year spans, so these are long research.
And have you done any research like this with Ramot at Tel Aviv University?
No, we have not. Unfortunately, I'm a graduate from
No,
from
the
the School
reason
of
I
Chemistry
wanted
here,
to
so,
hear that you tried and you didn't succeed.
We have
was
tried.
You share the IP.
this is a different topic, but licensing technologies from Israel is also something that it needs a master of its own.
Yeah.
And working with the academia, I worked at a previous venture capital, Proceed, which really tried to license technologies from the academia. This is very different. You have some licensing offices that are more professional than others, and this is a long process. And I can say that, we work with the best, also Bukhari and the Hebrew University. This took time.
My 5 cents to you on that topic from a different angle is the fact that I think there's on the beautiful side, there hasn't been much of a big change as I would hope it to be. And I've started back in 2004 when I was in Ecuador to speak to the TT offices and to the professors and technical institutions here in Tel Aviv. And I was hoping that there would be more kind of an awareness of those researchers into not just the pure research, but rather into an applied research and Cleantech related. Cleantech has become really sexy, as I've mentioned it, and not just necessarily water, but Cleantech in general. And, a civil engineering professor or civil engineering undergraduate, whatever it will be, could have so many applications which could be translated into really an applied research into some water-related, energy-related, whatever it will be, kind of And not, at least from my own perspective, there hasn't been much of a change, or kind of those up and running researchers are still looking for kind of a pure academic publications, which is perfect. I'm not accusing, I'm not saying anything. I would hope that those conferences, the awareness, those that we have in Israel and overseas, whatever is written in the media, I would hope to see a bit more of a change in terms of really a shift from not just necessarily into an applied research, but rather into cleantech related kind of thinking. And this is why talking to the industry, to the investors, seeing the potential within certain applications.
The academia in some way.
No, not to say, but rather to come to the
You won't,
research.
but academia is not ready to follow it. So let's say that from the 140 projects that in Cleantech in Israel, how many out of them are related to academic institutions?
So we actually hired somebody for 6 months to scour all the universities. We are in touch with all the commercialization offices regularly, and we did a 6-month project to try to identify IP out of the universities and spin them out and create companies. There are a couple of problems with it. One is, as Asaf mentioned, the researchers are in many cases, and I don't know whether, I don't think this is a criticism, but it's just kind of the fact, they're not very commercially minded. They're interested in the academic nature of their research findings, in exploring new sciences, etc. Making money out of that is not their primary motivation, which is great in one sense in terms of research for research's sake. On the other hand, for us as investors, it's a little bit difficult. The other thing is you can't just start a company by taking on the IP. You need people, right? As Rick mentioned, you need a great team. So you want to be backing, before you're backing technology or markets, you're backing an individual or a team of individuals. And so the process by which you go out and identify people who can manage and then marry them up with professors who are doing the research and have that work it's not trivial. I think, and this is probably worth a more in-depth discussion, but if you look at models that come out of Berkeley or Stanford or MIT and the venture communities that have developed around each of those universities, it's a much more fluid. There's less skepticism on either side. The universities are less worried that the VCs are going to steal their stuff. It's more collaborative and it's more win-win in its orientation. I think Israel will get there, but it's going to take some more time.
I must say that we see, specifically in Israel, even with researchers, you see the entrepreneurship also embedded within them. And we do see cooperation by researchers. They are eager to cooperate with a multinational company like Coke. We see a problem working with a tech transfer office. Here is where we see the bottleneck. Researchers tend to want to brainstorm together with the R&D groups stemming from multinational corporations. This is something that is very enhancing for all parties. Like I said, the tech transfer offices, for us, this is the main bottleneck. This is where things take time.
Yeah.
Name is David. I'm a mechanical engineer. I'm studying my master's in business here at County. My question goes to the venture capitalists. Basically, do you see a future in wave energy? Currently, when I was doing my studies, we did a lot of research in developing companies that were looking at wave energy, either the Polaris system in Scotland or wave buoys, even turbines, underwater turbines in the New York Hudson River. I was just curious, do you guys see a future in it? Currently, right now, it's a lot cheaper to build a coal power plant or even a solar farm.
Yeah, so the economics aren't quite there yet. I think the biggest issue for us specifically as Israel Cleantech, there's not a lot of know-how in this country around it. So we have, frankly, of the 1,070 projects, we've maybe seen one or two in wave energy or hydro.
I know there's one coming out of the Technion. There's a guy in Haifa who developed a company.
Yeah. The biggest challenge for us is the amount of capital needed to get from inception to profitability in a company like that. There's massive capital needs. both on the equity side and then debt financing, project finance, etc. And the time horizon is and the capital, the return on investment profile for a sub $100 million venture capital fund is just there's not a match. Yeah.
I'm Jeremy. I graduated last year from Subsectors. I had a question. You've been making often the parallel between the high-tech and the clean-tech industry. What we've been experiencing in the high-tech industry is often the technology is developed, then there is an exit. And in this exit, the technology is bought. Either R&D is remaining, either everything is leaving. Even when there is no exit, most of the time the R&D is remaining there. The company is leaving also in the United States most of the time. And we've been experiencing also the same thing with Cleantech, BrightSource, for instance, or HCF. And I was wondering if you think that we're going to manage a company growing fully here. Because, for instance, I'm a business graduate. If you're a business graduate, you have very few opportunities to be able to work in Cleantech, and most of the time, what you're experiencing, you have to leave the growth, to go abroad.
You take a shot.
And work in the field.
What?
You want to take a shot?
I'll take a shot. This is one of the issues in Israel is you have a lot of innovation, a lot of ideas, and then at some point there's an exit. It's sold, the company is sold, the IP is sold to a U.S. or another company in another country. And what happens then is the development of the jobs and the future and the growth leaves Israel. And one of the issues that we see, because Israel is such a young country, is there's a lack of middle management. It's a countrywide. I'm looking forward to your perspective. But what we see from afar is that there's tremendous innovation, great ideas, get things started, tee it up, get it through FDA if it's a medical device, get it approved and working, and then say thank you very much and sell it to somebody else. There's very few large industrial companies in Israel. You've got your Tevas, you've got these other companies, but there's very few. So one of the things how many people have read the book Startup Nation?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I spoke with Saul Singer, and I posed this to him, and I said, Saul, Israel's missing this because once that leaves, the jobs leave, the potential leaves, the income leaves, the growth leaves, and I'm one. If you look in the U.S., it's been around for a couple of years. People can graduate business school, they can go work for 3M, they can go work for Kraft, they can go work for an automotive, they can work for all these major industrial, and manufacturing companies, and pharma also. And they have programs to teach management. It's one thing to go to school. It's another thing to be out there in the real world where you need, 3 to 5 years of experience to really learn how to be a manager. And so my solution was, well, let's start taking people and sending them abroad and learn those and start bringing those skills and have a 10 or 20-year plan. It's not going to happen overnight, but have a 10 or 20-year plan to bring middle management, and which would grow into, mature management. And then 10 or 20 years from now, Israel doesn't have to do that if it doesn't want to. Saul had a very interesting answer. He disagreed. I still think he's wrong, but Saul disagreed. He said, no, this is what we're really good at. We're really good at the innovation. We're really good at getting it teed up. We're really getting it up and sold. And that's what we should continue to do. So I think it's an open dialogue, an open debate, whether we in Israel need to continue developing the management. I, for one, think so. But I'm curious what other people think. And there's an answer up there. What's your answer?
My answer is Teva. Teva continued to do a very good job, and they grew, and they provided jobs, and they did what you said, not what Saul said. And I think it is very important to develop an attitude of keeping the jobs and keeping the growth in Israel. I think part of it, unfortunately, is fostered by the venture capitalists who want to have an exit instead of building longer-term value that stays in Israel.
I'm sorry. Look, just one more comment, and then it's up to you. Would you please write me a note so I can give it to Sal? Number two is there's a difference between venture capital and private equity. Okay, when you have some of these home offices, for example, we are private equity. We're not a venture capital. We don't We don't have a time frame where we need to return investors' capital in 7 years or 5 years or extend it to 10 years. And so if you have private equity, we just sold a company at the end of December that we had owned for 24 years. Okay? So it's not just, I agree with you with the venture capital model. So the question is, can you integrate more private equity that has a longer time frame and doesn't mind getting distributions of dividends 5, 8, 10 years from now, or getting them 15 years from now, and letting the companies grow? And I'm sorry for interrupting that. You're up.
Can I just finish up? I just want to say also, in addition to the pressure from venture capital, there's also an Israeli type of cultural attitude, which is the world is insecure. Let's make something quick if we can, rather than relying on the long term. And I think there has to be a little bit more long-term thinking that starts to penetrate into the culture and into management.
We could use that in our government too.
In the U.S. also. We got 2 months at a time.
I'm thinking that, God is in the details, but the devil is in the details as well. And within the Cleantech details, in terms of scalability and really the ability to bring those companies all the way, the full Monty, basically be able to grow a company here in Israel and be able to take it and become a global leader. I think it's tougher in the Cleantech industry. In most cases, and definitely the VCs are not to be blamed for pushing that. I don't think that yet, there's definitely been a number of exits ever since Cleantech was defined as Cleantech probably in 2002. But basically, I think reality is that the giants, since it indeed to some extent it is a capital-intensive market, and if you don't bring strategic partners to be able to become a distributor or to scale up those technologies, definitely from Israel, let it be Siemens who did that with Solel or others. I think to some extent those unique criteria of Cleantech as defined are there to show that this reality is not that easy for the Israeli industry to do it on its own. And therefore, specifically within the Cleantech industry, I think that we don't have the skill set, which could be actually is the second emphasis that I'd like to make. We don't have yet the skill set. Daniel Birnbaum, and this is not because of you, Daniel, but the SodaStream example, which is not typical for being able to come up with a retail product, whatever, to the U.S. market and basically doing whatever they did so nicely just this last year. But in the high-tech industry, we do have some capabilities now, management capabilities, I would say. Companies that were taken into IPO some 20 years ago in the NASDAQ and all that. So within this industry, the high-tech industry, we have acquired so far some management skills and skill sets which could do that transition. In Cleantech, we have not seen that, and unfortunately, we're very much dependent on those corporate giants that will buy those companies and scale them up to the global markets.
I think the key is going to be what happens when those corporates start their buying, right, of Israeli companies. And in high tech, you could make Saul's argument, and I see the rationale for it, because it's kind of perfect. You have through the VCs, you're funneling direct foreign investment into the country, right? It's foreign money coming into Israel, being directly employed and creating jobs, creating employment. And then those companies get taken out, again, by multinationals who are non-Israeli based, more foreign money coming in. The entrepreneurs get enriched. They plow their money as angel investors, or they start their own companies again, next time partially with their own money. And in many cases, the multinationals, when they do the acquisitions, they set up shop here, right? So you have Microsoft here through acquisitions, and Motorola and Intel and Apple just recently bought a company, Cisco, Broadcom. These are large U.S. Companies, large market caps, great management talent. In many cases, some of the entrepreneurs go back and they spend time in the Valley and other parts of the United States getting that extra management talent. Then they come back, they work for the company a little bit longer, then they go out and start their next startup. And so the key is to understand, hey, where's the money flowing and where are the jobs being created? And for me, it doesn't really matter whether it's Motorola owned or whether it's an Israeli brand name, as long as the jobs stay here and the technology gets innovated here. And you talk in the clean tech sense, so Bright Source Energy is an example, right? The projects are being done in the Mojave Desert, but the R&D and the engineering is here in Jerusalem, right? Over 150 people have been employed here. All the money has come from abroad. These people have had their employment financed from foreign investors for the last 5 years. The company hopefully will go public soon. They're not going to be shipping those jobs overseas so fast. Yeah.
It's only R&D jobs. I mean, we cannot all be engineers, even if we have the highest rate of engineer in the world.
It's difficult to justify having sales, marketing, business development people located here when your markets are abroad, and that's you look at Nokia or Siemens. I mean, these are homegrown large multinationals, but it's a similar. The domestic markets just aren't interesting, and so many of those jobs are going to have to be closer to the end customer. Yeah.
Hi, Glenn. I'm sorry to make a little bit more of a dialogue than a question, but I'd like to say something. When you mentioned that business development has to be done elsewhere, one of the things that I've noticed since I've moved to Israel, I think that this tendency has accelerated since I moved to Israel 6 years ago, is that you can stay in Israel and do business development here for the rest of the world. Because now there are so many delegations coming from all over the world, delegations. I mean, just think last year, I made a delegation from Brazil, a delegation from Korea, this was private from China, all these other locations, they come here specifically to look for Israeli technology. And I think that certainly along with the publication of the book Startup Nation, but even without it, there's a recommendation that if you're looking for something new and interesting, you come to Israel. And I've been finding that it's easier for me to do business development and make contacts with the people who come to Israel. And a couple of years ago, I was flying all around the world, going to this conference in London, this conference in New York, and so forth. And basically for the last year, I've been staying in Israel, meeting the people here. The ones who come here are pre-selected for their having an interest in doing business with you. You don't have to go to London and say, well, I'm not sure I want to be involved with such an unstable country in the middle of the Middle East and so forth. The people who come here already realize, beautiful beaches in Tel Aviv and the whole thing. And they realize that it's not as horrible a place as they hear about in the newspapers. So I think that we're seeing a reversal of that trend. Certainly we need the local people in each environment, but I'm being constantly amazed at how much you can do while being in Israel. And I think it's a very good sign of the future of the country when you see this happen.
I think just to follow up on that, and then I think we should wrap up. We'll have one more question. What's interesting, particularly in the context of clean tech, where many of the end markets are east, right? China, enormous market. India, that's where a lot of the economic growth is happening. That's where the urbanization is happening. Where there's water scarcity, and so the solutions are more and more targeted there. And geographically, we're 8 hours this way, 8 hours that way. So you do have a point that and perhaps in clean tech we'll see more of that. Time will tell. One more question. Yeah, you were very, very patient.
My name is Libby Poat. I'm the professional director of the Tel Aviv Institute for Business and the Environment here at the university. I have a kind of different angle of the first question to you, Rick. There's a lot of the critique that we have, that environmentalists and others have of Israeli policies and bureaucracies, is that there's a really minuscule percentage of solar power here. And I was wondering if that has absolutely no bearing, which is what I can understand of your investment review regarding investment in water, which is water technologies which are very heavily applied within Israel in relation to solar energy technologies. Not
if I can add one, the question is that one of the problems that you hear from a lot of people in the clean tech sector here is we go abroad to try and market it, but people want to see that it was implemented here first, and there's so many obstacles. Even within Israel, they say, show us that it works somewhere else. And so, how much of a factor is it that it's not implemented?
So the critique of the government says, well, if we don't implement it here, we won't be able to get investment. We won't be able to sell it outside. So is that true or not?
I guess my point was that it doesn't have to be proven, it doesn't have to be used in Israel. You need a beta site. You need some place to be your first place. And so if that's Israel, wonderful. There's different needs in different countries for different solutions. And so just because it's not being used or implemented in Israel, from our perspective, doesn't mean that it's bad technology or there's something wrong with it or the company wouldn't be successful. But you do need to find where's that first one to show, and it's just easier because it's in Israel because it's here, but if it's someplace else, it's someplace else. But I think just because it's not in Israel is not necessarily a bad thing. You just need to find where your first one is. Because everybody wants to be the first to be second. Very rarely does anybody want to try something new and be the first one to do it. So everybody, it worked over there, sign me up. So it's just easier, but in some cases. Agree, disagree?
Yeah, in fact, this is something that I've been seeing all over the place. I heard the CEO of CH2ML, which is one of the largest engineering incubators, saying that he came up with a new technology in the US, a water-related technology. And he came up to this CEO of water utility. And this guy told him, I don't want to be the first, I want to be the fifth. Seriously. Maybe because of regulation, whatever, definitely. But, being in the high-tech industry, working for Congress, I used to go to, Vodafone, Telecom Italia, Mobile, whatever. They wanted to be the first to try and test for within their own 200 employees, whatever, the new application. They wanted to be the first. They know how to take some risks. Regardless of the regulation part, water quality issues and stuff like that, or energy related, I think this is one of the conservative lessons. This market is definitely there. It is definitely probably the toughest area within this industry.
So is there a disparity between investment in water and investment in solar because of the implementation?
You mean in Israel?
I haven't seen it. I mean, I think I showed up a pie chart there. In terms of the opportunities that we're seeing, about 40-45% are still energy related. Not all solar, but energy efficiency, lighting, fuel cells, batteries. Israel is a wonderful test bed for water technologies. It's too small of a market for some of the energy related technologies, but we haven't seen investors get scared away because we haven't been able to prove it locally. And more often than that, as Rick said, if you can get a referenceable customer, it really doesn't matter whether that's an Israeli referenceable customer or somebody in the UK, and it works just as well for an investor.
See, my company, the Lesico company, I think we can give you the opportunity to test many new technologies in our facilities, because we are one of the biggest environmental companies in Israel. We are involved in desalination, in sewage water and others. And also we have a department of R&D. So the question is how we can work with you to show you our capabilities and joint venture with you to try a new model of a cleantech water filter. How we can think with you because we don't know how to do it. Because we can be the Israeli big company in water like the Torah, because they are bigger, but we treat the 200,000 cubic meter and switch every day. How we can build some new idea of cooperation with companies like this.
Well, we should take it offline. I think all of us have something to add in that respect, but I want to be conscious of time. We were called to end at 8, and thank you very much for your attention.